Hello, I'm here again for you to have a short discussion about our next topic. But of course, we are going to have first our recall. Okay? So, like yesterday, I have sent to you a video about the domain and range of a relation given the graph. Okay? So, let's have this graph. Okay? So, we have here this graph. So, what do you think is our domain here? Okay, correct. So our x here will be any element of real number is correct. How about our range? Yes, we have our y will be any element of real numbers because as you have seen, we have here the arrowhead, and since it is diagonal, so it means you can have different values of our x and y. So again, that's why our domain and range are any element of real numbers. Okay, next, this one. What will be our domain here? Yes, our domain here again is any element of real numbers. Okay, how about the range or our y? That's correct. We have y is less than or equal to, yes, positive 3 because we have here 1, 2, 3. Okay. Next, how about this one? Okay, so what will be our domain here or the values of x? That's correct. We have x is any element of real numbers. Correct. How about the range? Yes, we have our y will be any element of real numbers. Okay. Any question? Okay, so let's have the last graph. So we have here. Okay, so our d here or our domain will be x is greater than or equal to 0. So as you have seen, it goes to the right and it starts with 0. So that's why our x is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, how about our y? Okay, so we have here our y is greater than or equal to negative 2. So as you have seen, it starts with negative 2 going upward. So that's why greater than or equal to is the inequality symbol that we are going to use. Okay, so any questions so far? Okay, so I hope it is clear to you in finding the domain and range given the graph. Okay, so let's proceed with our topic. Okay, so let's have some questions first. Okay, so I have here, can you live without your parents? Yes or no? Okay, so some of you may answer yes, some of you may answer no, but I think most of you, okay, is having the answer no. Okay, next. Who among you live with their parents? Okay, so I hope and I think that most of you again are still living with your parents, okay, because you have no job yet, okay, so you have no work yet, you don't have your income, so that's why you are still living with your parents. Okay, next. Therefore, are you dependent or independent individual? So if your answer earlier in the question is that you cannot live without your parents and you still live with your parents, so are you dependent or independent individual? Yes, you are an example of dependent individual because you are still depending on your parents. Okay, so still you are an example of dependent individual. Okay, so let's have this. If you will study or if you study hard, what will happen? Okay, yes, of course. If you study hard, then you will pass the exam. Or another thing, if you study hard, then yes, you will get high grades, of course. And there are many other possible answers that you will obtain in this question. Next question. Okay? So, if you spend much of your allowance, what will happen? Yes, if you spend much of your allowance, you will not have your savings. That's correct. Okay. Next, let's have this question. Ooh. If you eat much, what will happen? Okay, so like what you saw in the picture. If you eat much, then you will gain weight. Yes, of course. Okay? Or maybe if you eat much, then you will get obese. Okay? Okay? So if you will eat very, very much, okay, so you will get obese. Okay. So answering those questions are examples of the independent and dependent variables in real life. Okay? So for this day, we are going to have this. Again, independent and dependent variables. Okay? So let's have how we are going to rewrite the functions. Okay? So you are going to identify first the independent and dependent variables in the given situation. So the situation is, a painter must measure a room before deciding how much paint to buy. So again, a painter must measure a room before deciding how much paint to buy. So if we are going to write this using function, so we may say that the amount of paint depends on the measurement of a room. So if we are going to have the independent and dependent variable, so we may say that our dependent variable will be the amount of paint, and the independent variable will be the measurement of the room. Okay? Next, let's have the situation. For the second example, Carl buys p kilos of apples at 80 pesos per kilo. So how are you going to rewrite this as a function? So again, Carl buys p kilos of apples at 80 pesos per kilo. So what should it be? So you may rewrite this in the form, the cost of apples depends on the number of kilos bought. Okay? So how are we going to determine the dependent and independent variable in the given statement? Okay, so that's correct. The dependent variable will be the cost and the independent variable will be the kilos. Okay? Of course, the cost of apples will be depending on the number of kilos that you are going to buy. Okay? Let's have the third example. We have the height of a candle decreased d centimeters for every hour it burns. So again, the height of a candle decreased d centimeters for every hour it burns. So how are we going to translate this into a function statement? Okay, so we have the height of a candle depends on the number of hours it burns. Okay? So what will be our dependent variable and our independent variable? Okay, so we have the dependent variable will be the height of the candle and the independent is the number of hours it burns or the time. Okay, so any questions so far? Okay, so let's proceed with the fourth example. A veterinarian must weigh an animal before determining the amount of medication. So again, a veterinarian must weigh an animal before determining the amount of medication. Okay, so if we are going to write this in the form of function, so the amount of medication depends on the weight of an animal. Okay, so even you as a child, okay, so you are always weighing by the, or you are always weighed by the secretary of your pediatrician before you are going to enter in his or her clinic. Okay? And then the amount of medicine that you are going to intake will depend on your weight. Okay? So the same with animals. So the amount of medication depends on the weight of an animal. So therefore, our dependent variable will be the amount of medication and the independent will be the weight of animal. Okay? And for our last example, let us have a company charges 500 pesos per hour to send or to rent a jackhammer. Again, a company charges 500 pesos per hour to rent a jackhammer. Okay? So we will have to translate this into a statement expressing a function. So we will have here, the cost to rent a jackhammer depends on the length of time it is rented. So again, the cost to rent a jackhammer depends on the length of time it is rented. Okay, so obviously, our dependent variable will be the cost, okay, or the cost to rent a jackhammer, and the independent variable will be the length of time it is rented, or simply time. Okay, so those are our examples of how you are going to identify the independent and dependent variable. So how are we going to define the dependent and independent variable? So you have to remember that dependent variable is a mathematical variable whose value is determined by that of one or more other variables in a function. It depends on the independent variable. While independent variable is a mathematical variable that is independent on the other variables in an expression or function and whose value determines one or more of the values of the other variables. It controls the dependent variable. So the variable x is considered the independent variable because any value could be assigned to it. However, the variable y is the dependent variable because its value depends on the value of x. Okay? So that's why if you are going to recall, you will always have the statement or the phrase, let x be 10, for example. Let x be 1. Okay? So that is the dependent or independent variable. Wherein, as you solve for y, so you will get any value of y depending on the value of x. So that's why our y is dependent variable. Okay, so is there any question? Okay, so let's proceed. So these are some of the helpful hints. There are several or different ways to describe the variables of a function. So again, when we say independent variable, those are the x values, domain, input, or x. And when we say dependent variable, these are the y values, range, output, or f of x, or the function of x. Okay? So these are the clue words or phrases that you are going to put on your mind. So again, the input of a function is the independent variable. The output of a function is the dependent variable. The value of the dependent variable depends on or is a function of the value of the independent variable. Okay, so let's try this. You are going to classify the variables as independent or dependent. Okay, so we have here time and salary. So you are going to write here which is the dependent variable and independent variable. Number 2, the number of hours boiling and the amount of water left in the pot. So which is the dependent variable and the independent variable. Then number 3, the distance covered and the volume of the gasoline left. We have to write here again the dependent variable and the independent variable. Next, number 4, we have the number of hours studied to the grade on the test. So we have again to determine the dependent variable and the independent variable. And last, we have the height of a plant to the number of months grown. So again, you are going to determine the dependent variable and the independent variable. Okay? So I will give you few minutes. Okay? So suppose that you already have your answer. Okay? So let's have again number 1. Time and salary, which is the independent and dependent variable. Okay, so our dependent variable will be the salary and the independent is time, obviously. Okay? Because your salary depends on the time or the number of time or the number of hours that you are going to work. Okay? So, the longer the time, the higher the salary. Okay, next, number 2. The number of hours boiling and the amount of water left in the pot. So, our dependent variable will be the water left in the pot. And the independent will be the number of hours boiling. Okay. Next. Number 3, we have the distance covered and the volume of the gasoline left. Our dependent variable here will be the volume of the gasoline left, and the independent will be the distance covered. Okay? Next, number 4, the number of hours studied to the grade on the test. So, dependent variable will be grade on the test. Independent, the number of hours studied. Okay? So, your grade will depend on the number of hours of your studying time. Okay. Next, height of a plant to the number of months grown. We have the dependent variable will be the height of the plant, and the independent will be months grown. Okay? So, another hint, when we say dependent variable, that depends on the independent variable, while independent can't stand alone. Okay? So, like in these examples, independent variable can stand on his own. Okay? So, while the dependent will not be obvious, will not be obtained if you do not have your independent variable. Okay? So, is there any question? So, if you don't have, so that's all for this day. Thank you and God bless.